Okay. Right. So good evening, everyone. Thank you for bearing with us despite all these technical difficulties. Just a reminder about the series that we are running, my colleague Hatoun and myself. So this series is set to explore the representation and the empowerment of women in the MENA region through art, literature, and history. For this, we have adopted a multi and interdisciplinary approach to our study, which is enriched by presentations given by scholars and activists from across the globe. This series, which is envisaged as a platform for debating the broader theme of women and gender in MENA and in Islam, began on the 1st of December and is running today its 10th lecture, with one more lecture to take place on the 24th. And then we will come to a close for this academic year, but we are going to relaunch our second round in October 2022. I think we have enjoyed all the lectures that were presented, and we have shared those we could share, and hopefully we will share today since we are recording it. And of course, today I would like to thank all of you who have been faithful to the series, and also the speakers who have lined up for the next round. We have received a lot of volunteers actually proposing to give lectures next round, and we almost have a full program already. So this is really heartwarming and really giving us a sense that this series is useful, and hopefully we will continue to run it next year. Meanwhile, my colleague Hatoun and I are going to meet at the end of this month and discuss other avenues for this series in terms of publications, of the proceedings, and establishing a media platform, etc., etc. We will keep you posted about that. I think without spending too much more on this, I will let my colleague Hatoun introduce our speaker today. And before that, I would welcome you, Yafa, and thank you for bearing with us and for willing to speak to us on this exciting subject, which I look forward to hear. Thank you. Over to you, Hatoun.
Thank you, Zahia. I'm trying to change the. Okay. So I repeat, I second Professor Zahia on welcoming everyone and on apologizing for any delay. We would like to you to join us today in this lecture by Professor Yafa Shanneik, who is currently a visiting professor of Islamic Studies at the University of Lund, Sweden. She researches the dynamics and the trajectories of gender in Islam within the context of contemporary diasporic and transnational Muslim women's spaces. Her research focuses on the intersection between gender, Islam, and the state. It particularly analyzes the state governance of religious communities in Europe and the Middle East. Currently, she's working on a project which explores women's experiences of transnational marriage practices performed by Iraqi and Syrian women who have settled in Europe and other countries in the Middle East since the 1980s. She has published several articles and books on gender in Islam. Her edited book with Annelies Moores, entitled Global Dynamics of Shi'i Marriages, Religion, Gender and Belonging by Rogers in 2021. And just recently, she published The Art of Resistance in Islam, the Performance of Politics Among Shi'i Women in the Middle East and Beyond, which was published by Cambridge University in 2022. Now, Dr. Yafa Shanneik is going to talk about empowerment through rituals, reconsidering female agency in contemporary Islam, which is, I think, she's going mainly to consider Shii women in particular. Isn't it, Yafa? Yeah. feel free now to, the floor is yours. Share your screen. Okay.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Hatun, and thank you, Zahia. Thank you both for organizing this very interesting series and for having me. And thank you very much for everyone who is joining us tonight as well. It's really a pleasure to be here and to tell you a little bit about my research on Shii women. I am particularly interested today in talking about a Shii women's transnational resistance movement and the role they play in redefining our understanding of female agency and women's empowerment through the use of their body in religious ritual practices. So I am really delighted to be able to talk about that particular topic because it is, as Hatun was explaining, part of my recently published book, and I'm very happy to demonstrate some of my, or illustrate some of my research findings there. So in terms of the structure, Hatun, can you please remind me how long you want me to speak for, just so that I could stop myself?
Yeah. Okay. You have half an hour, so we're starting now. We're finishing by 8:90. In half an hour, I'll remind you 5 minutes before.
Okay, super. Thank you. So in terms of what I would like to cover today, I would like to give a very brief historic overview of the sectarian divide within Islam, and then moving to capture the diversity of Shia communities, highlighting thereby the particular group that I have been interested in. And the reason why I've been interested in that particular group is related to their unique style of producing Shia aesthetics through practices that involve the body. And the female body particularly, because they are very specific to that particular group. I must say that these self-inflicted pain practices, they have provoked and still are provoking critical responses from within the Shia community as well as from outside. But I'm therefore even more interested in that particular group because they do cause a lot of discussions around their involvement in specific ritual practices and women's involvement in particular. So, you know, issues around redemptive hegemony and the role women play in redefining that hegemony is something that I'm particularly interested in. So, you know, questions around power, gender power within communities. We're talking about internal gender power dynamics, but also between different sectarian groups is something that I am particularly interested in because they are also articulated through rituals. So who performs what and how specific rituals are performed are very well articulated within ritual practices. So who defines who is included and excluded from participation is something that I will be talking about today. Particularly because within an Islamic context, religious authority and leadership has traditionally been claimed within male domination and gendered hierarchy, leading to development of gender-specific religious practices. So we have specific practices that are exclusively to women, to men, where women are excluded from traditionally. But we have seen recently a development in that understanding and in in women claiming their right to participate in particular rituals that have been traditionally preserved for men. And another step further that I'm interested in is the role the female body plays in asserting women's positions within their communities, and particularly in redefining power dynamics anew within their own terms, within their own understandings of gender roles. So these are the topics that I would like to cover today. So let's move on to some historical explanations. So as you all know, I mean, again, I'm not, I won't go into detail, but as you all know, after the death of the Prophet Muhammad, discussion started around who will lead the Muslim community after him. And so one party said it needs to be someone from, a person from within the Prophet's family, and others said, no, it actually needs to be from, somebody elected from the wider community. And that is in a nutshell, really, the start of the sectarian division in Islam between Sunnis and Shi'is, with the latter upholding the sole prerogative of the family of the Prophet to lead the Muslim community. So, in terms of historical events that are important within Shia Islam, obviously within the reign of the second caliph of the Umayyad dynasty, he asked Husayn, the grandson of the Prophet Muhammad, to express their allegiance and support to the Umayyads, who refused, and then joined a planned revolt against the Umayyads in Syria. That grandson of the Prophet, who's called Husayn, made his way with his supporters to Karbala, which is in southern Iraq. And it is believed that they were intercepted by the Umayyads' army, where a battle referred to as the Battle of Karbala in 680 took place while they were camping on their way to Syria in order to make the revolt, or do the revolt against the Umayyads there. And that particular event is fundamental for Shi'i's identity understanding. So you can see here that battle has been presented in art and is presented in various poetry, recitations, and it is and it does play an essential role in ritual practices within Shia communities. I'm interested in 12th Shia Islam, and looking into different groups and subgroups within Shia Islam, and I've focused on women-only religious gatherings who have been commemorating the death of Imam Husayn and his supporters since his fall at the Battle of Karbala. And it is believed that women were the first to start the commemoration of Imam Husayn, particularly his sister Zainab, who performed a commemoration ritual while she was in captivity in Yazid's prison in Syria. So that is, and obviously this is all contested. It's history, so it is obviously part of an ongoing discussion of who did perform the first ritual commemoration practices, and so on and so forth. So it is something that is obviously historically contested, but in terms of the communities that I have been part of, that was part of their essential, or their pillars on which their identity and standing was standing on. So it is actually something that the group deeply believed in. So so Imam Husayn was killed in 680 in Karbala, and that Battle of Karbala is playing a huge or dominant role in their identity understanding. And since then, the Shia community and women in particular are believed to have organized, performed, and led commemoration rituals. And I have been particularly interested in these rituals. And my interest actually started in 2009 when I was in the Republic of Ireland, where my research started. And since then, I have participated in 260 public, semi-public, and fully private ritual female practices in different countries. So as I said, I started in the Republic of Ireland, but then moved to the UK in terms of the European context, and then went to the Middle East, and particularly to countries such as Kuwait, Bahrain, United Arab Emirates, and Iran, in order to observe and participate in ritual practices performed by various Shi'i groups. As I said, I am particularly interested in a specific Shi'i group who are called Shirazis, because they are followers of Muhammad al-Shirazi. The Shirazis are known to be outside of the mainstream clerical establishment of Najaf and in opposition to the Islamic Republic of Iran. Which is really interesting, you know, the internal power dynamics within 12 Shia Islam, who has the right to, you know, present or represent the Shia community, and who sees, you know, oneself, or which group sees itself as the representative or the authentic representation of Shia Islam. So you do have these power dynamics within Shia communities, and the Shirazis were particularly interesting in that regard because they use religious ritual practices as a tool to demonstrate their authenticity. So they articulate their true, as they call it, their true Shia-ness through the ritual practices that they insist of performing, whereas other groups, for example, would have a more lenient understanding of religious ritual practices, where they would, for example, you know, distance themselves from specific ritual practices such as self-flagellation, for example, and the walking on hot coal. These particular two practices are two markers, if you want to call them, of the factional identity of Shirazis, because they are the ones and the only, more or less, ones who would insist of having these two practices performed and used as a marker for their identity, for their Shirazi true identity. And obviously these two practices are, it's very important to highlight this throughout the talk today, because these two practices are very controversial within Shia generally, and obviously between Sunnis and Shia, but also particularly within self-flagellation. It is also important to highlight the political element of that particular practice, because it also is used as a symbolic articulation of political agendas, whether pro or against Iran, and who supports Iran and who doesn't, and so on and so forth. And you can see these political references very much articulated in particular poetries, and obviously also in sermons and speeches within religious gatherings, which are called majalis in Arabic. Shirazis are also very interesting because they are active in social media. So they are, as we would call them, active netizens. They have a huge transnational reach, and they are very high-tech equipped, and they do their YouTube videos. They use the internet to expand their network and also to connect transnationally as well. So I am very much interested in the transnational reach of the Shirazis, because because specific practices were actually originally performed in one context, and then it spread throughout the globe. And that power of reaching, of transnational connectivity is very important, particularly for Shirazis as a group that is not part of the mainstream, that has traditionally been marginalized. And through their insistence of performing specific practices, they come back to the center, so to speak, and be part of central discussion around Shia authenticity, as they would call it. Yeah, so the performance of self-flagellation or flagellation, so it and the walking on hot coal are two practices that actually, again, have that historical reference. So why do we have these two? And I mean, those of you who also look into other religious traditions, self-flagellation and walking on hot coal are practices that also exist in other religious traditions, but are performed within a particular Shi'i groups as well, because it's also, you know, reflects a particular historical narrative that specific groups believe in. So, for example, you know, obviously the self-flagellation or flagellation generally, so either you flagellate yourself or other people flagellate you, are part of a you know, feeling the pain of those who fell in the Battle of Karbala. So obviously Imam Husayn's fall, but also of his supporters. So that is a sort of symbolic reenactment of the suffering of Imam Husayn and his supporters at the Battle of Karbala, and the willingness of Shia to die for the cause of Imam Husayn as well. So it is a sort of, you know, symbolic, if you like, participation in the battle itself, and also the willingness to die for the cause of Imam Husayn. And here we have the connection between history and present day persecution of Shia within the Middle East and around the globe. So you have that, you know, combination of historical narrative that is used in the present in order to make sense of specific you know, political and religious situations within Shia Islam and sectarian dimensions there. So and here that is really interesting to look at, and which I have been doing in my own research, looking at how particular narratives historical narratives are linked to present day situations in regards to the you know, unequal treatment of Shi'is within Sunni autocratic regimes, the persecution of Shi'is, the displacement of Shi'is, and so on and so forth. So you have that link between the political, social-religious situation of Shi'is today that is linked to the historical suffering of Shi'is since the Battle of Karbala, i.e. since the death of Imam Husayn. And that link is so much articulated within religious practices. It is part of the sermon. It is part of the poetry that is recited during these majalis or these religious gatherings. So the flagellation or self-flagellation is part of that, reflection of historical events or understanding or representations of historic events. The walking in hot coal is another one, and that is really interesting, particularly from a gendered perspective, because it is believed that after the killing of Imam Husayn and his supporters, so most of the male supporters were killed, women were dragged across the burned tent. So as I mentioned, Imam Husayn and his supporters were camping at Karbala, southern Iraq, and it's believed that he was then killed by the Umayyad troops. And after their death, they burned the tents down. And it is then believed that the remaining female survivors were dragged over the burned tent, the ashes of the burned tent. And this is why Shia women today even more insist that looking at Shia history and how women were dragged, it was women who were dragged over the burnt tent, that women should have the right to actually participate in that reenactment through walking on hot coal themselves. Traditionally, however, that has been preserved mainly for men. So women were traditionally excluded from these two practices, the self-flagellation and the walking in hot coal. Self-flagellation has been presented as a rite of masculinity, and therefore, and women were spectators, observers, traditionally looking at men performing tatbir or self-flagellation, but not participating in it. And it was just in 2007 that this has changed, and it's changed among Shia in the diaspora in London. So it is believed that Shia communities, particularly the Shirazi Shia community in London in 2007, were the ones who initiated the practice for the first time among women to perform tatbir. And here I have added two pictures of the tatbir tent, as they call it, within the female space. So here, the picture before was actually the male space at that specific day. So it was the same day, but that was for males. And here we have the space for women. And so as you can see here, that is also the original female space within the Husayniyya, as they call it, where religious gatherings for Shias take place. And but for that day, which is the 10th day during the commemoration period of Shi'is, that is the day where Shi'is believe that Imam Husayn was killed, and that is the day where the self-flagellation takes place after having 10 days of commemoration period. So it is believed that since the death of Imam Husayn, every single year for 10 days, Shi'is commemorate the death of the ones who were killed during the Battle of Karbala, and on the 10th day, it is believed that then Imam Husayn was killed, and that is the day where self-flagellation takes place, and the walking in hot coal as well. And that is regarded as the peak of their commemoration period. So you have, for 10 days, Shi'is would gather and perform rituals together in terms of sermons and participating in recitation of poetry and self-hitting, which are called latam or latmiya in Arabic. And on the 10th day, that is the peak of their commemoration ritual, where it is believed that Imam Husayn was killed, and therefore the performance of self-flagellation takes place. And as you can see here, it is all covered in blue plastic in order to make it, it needs to be clean. It is a ritual performance, so it is all sanitized, and you are not allowed to enter unless you have changed your clothes. So as you can see here, again, I wasn't obviously able to do pictures, on women, but just imagine very similar outfits that women would be wearing. So performance would change from their clothes, from their black clothes as they were, because it's a commemoration period, to a white gown. And that white gown symbolizes, again, symbolizes death. That is the gown that, within Islamic burial traditions, the dead body would be wrapped up with. So again, the symbolic reenactment of death is expressed through the white gown that people would then change in. So women would change into these white gowns and would enter the ritual space and then perform a flagellation. As you can see here, there are 3 chairs and then buckets, and on the other side there you will find usually like a table with orange juice and things to in case anyone is fainted or needs help. There were always also people in place. An ambulance car was outside, so it was very, very well organized. Everyone was taking care of everyone, and so on and so forth.
Yafa, 5 minutes to go.
Oh, is it? Oh my God. I'm okay. So, but then the question is, just very quickly. What we have seen in the Middle East is a decline in men participating in self-flagellation, but women are increasingly participating. So in 2007, it started with just a couple of women, and then later on, in 2014, when I was part of it, hundreds of women were performing self-flagellation. And the question is, why would women increasingly decide to self-flagellate? Why would they participate? Not only participate, they would fight in order to be part of that practice. Why would women use their own body to perform self-inflicted pain on their body in order to fight for their rights? And is that a form of female empowerment or not? I mean, this is really the question that I have been asking myself in my book, and have been discussing with colleagues around, because the problem is, or the issue around that is that self-inflicted pain practices are not regarded as agentic practices. I mean, women's resistance through their body is a form of religious, religious self-inflicted pain practices are not necessarily recognized as agentic practices. And it does not fit within our universal progressive thinking of emancipatory reception of female resistance. It doesn't. So, but my argument is that even though they do not, conform to our own understanding of progressive, liberal, emancipatory female empowerment, we should still recognize them as such, because people performing them are recognizing them as such, and they are fighting against male resistance within their own communities in order to participate in what they see themselves or believe in to be the ultimate expression of their love to Imam Husayn. I mean, this is a way for them to link with the transcendental, a link that traditionally has been preserved for men only. So they are claiming their right to participate in something that they have been excluded from for centuries. So here, women are using religious aesthetics through the performance of self-inflicted pain practices in order to resist gender inequality, and also sectarian discrimination and state violence. So they use their body, their female body, in order to fight against male hegemony, excluding them from practices that they have preserved for themselves only, and also sectarian supremacy, because we have obviously the Sunni Shia divide here, and the attack on Shi'is of using practices like self-flagellation as a symbol of identity. And then obviously, if you look at the text and the poetry and the context within which these practices are performed, you can see here also women participating in political authoritarianism, articulating the disadvantages of Shia and the discrimination of Shia, in particular Sunni-ruled autocratic regimes in the Gulf, and claiming their right to also participate in the fight for equality for their groups. So what we see here then is that women use self-inflicted pain practices in order to contribute to a reordering of power on a local, national, and transnational level. On a local level within their own communities, on a national level within the sectarian divide, particularly in Sunni autocratic regimes, and then transnationally in building a Shia Shirazi network of women who exchange their experiences and their empowerment. Because what happened was that the practice started in London, but since 2007 has been performed throughout the globe. So when I was there in 2014, there were women who came from Norway and from the Netherlands in order to observe the performance of self-flagellation and walking hot coal among women, and in order to take that with them in order to perform them in their own countries. And why I went to the Middle East was also to see to what extent that practice has been transnationally performed, and how women in London have influenced other women in the Middle East to perform self-flagellation. And that is something that is really interesting, because usually our understanding is that what happens in Europe in terms of Muslim communities is coming from the Middle East. So the Middle East is seen as the central, who is influencing the periphery, which are Muslims in the diaspora. But in that case, it is the other way around. Muslims in the diaspora, Shi'is in the diaspora, are influencing new gender, and I'm ending here, new gender dynamics in the Middle East through their transnational connectedness, and reordering of power that they have, that they perform in Europe, and have been performing and fighting for in Europe, in order to influence other communities in the Middle East and beyond, in order to participate in rituals that have been traditionally preserved for men only. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yafa. This was extremely interesting.
Thank you very much, Yafa. This is excellent.
Yes, yeah. If you could please unshare your screen so we can start our Q&A session. Great. Yafa, if I may start asking a few questions. And this is, first of all, I would like to understand whether this practice or this revolt amongst Shi'i women is done only within this one sect of Shirazis only, and is Shirazi a sect that is based? What is exactly Shirazi, and where are they based, in Iran or Iraq or Syria? If you could give us a quick answer to this. The second question I have is about women participation in textual interpretation. Now they are trying to challenge the practice and try to claim it to themselves and through that to reach to Al-Husayn. But were they able also to challenge any textual interpretations as well? I like the idea that Europe started and then the East followed. It changes the dynamics. So if you could also elaborate on who exactly followed whom and what is the size of this following and what is the reaction? Okay, that last question. What is the reaction of male maraja or the references of male Shi'i authority? Okay.
Yeah, thank you very much. So very quickly, in terms of Shirazis, they are in Iraq, but they are all over. I mean, they have various centers in different countries. So they have centers in Kuwait. They used to have in Syria and in London specifically. But they are from or their central bases is Iraq, but they are transnationally yeah, and London played a huge role in the network of the Shirazis, obviously, as well. And yeah, this is very quickly on that. In terms of textual interpretations, yes. So because the thing is that historically, men claimed their right to participate in these rituals, and they based their right on their understanding of history, and so they. So what Shirazi women did in order to justify, because they can't just say, okay, now women are doing it and that's it and you need to accept it. What they did, actually, they went back to history or historical narrative and highlighted particular narratives. So, for example, there is a narrative that actually recalls Sayyida Zainab when she heard that her brother was killed on the Battle of Karbala, that she hit her forehead against the a saddle, or some say against the pillar of her tent. By doing so, her forehead caused bleeding, and this is why the foreheads are flagellated mainly, but also other parts of the body. So women, they present, obviously, Sayyida Zainab plays a huge role as a role model for Shirazis particularly, and for others as well. And they say if Sayyida Zainab did not, think twice of hitting her forehead as an expression of sorrow for the fall of her brother, why should we? Yeah. So we, and this is where that narrative comes through, where they say that, and looking at Shia Hadith text, you can also go back to that. They go back to these textual references in order to support their claim for their right to participate in the practice. Mm-hmm. Yes, the center-periphery relationship between Europe and the Middle East is really interesting here, because again, it is just a reversed, so to speak, center-periphery. So instead of the Middle East being the center, now Europe, particularly London, is the center where that particular practice started, and since then have influenced so many other female communities or women communities across Europe and the Middle East and beyond as well. So obviously I have not done research in the States and Australia and Canada and so on, but based on the participants that I talked with, you also can find communities beyond Europe and the Middle East, where women have started to participate in self-inflicted pain practices as well.
Mhm.
And yeah, so that is very quickly. If there were any other points.
I'll take the questions from the chat, if I may. There's a question from MCW, and she says, what role do the wounds play in women's social power and agency? And another one, I think, which is linked to this one, is from May Sartawi. She says, in Kuwait, Mariam Cook is the MCW. Hello. Okay. In May's question, she says, in Kuwaiti Majlis, women do participate in self-flagellation, the forehead, the face, the chest, etc. So I think these are all, these two questions are interlinked. If you could answer them, Yafa.
Yes, so wounds, they play a huge role. So because they are, well, first of all, you have probably all seen pictures of men proudly posing in front of cameras after doing the self-flagellation, in order to present the amount of blood that they have shed for their love of Imam Husayn. And obviously, wearing the kafan, so the white gown, also helps in, to highlight the amount of blood that has been shed. And that would be taken as a picture in order to present their true Shi'aness, if you want to call it. What do women do? Because they cannot pose in front of cameras. So some women that I met would actually take off their gown, make a picture of that, and post that in social media in order to present, again, very similar to men, the amount of bloodshed. Wounds specifically are also really interesting. So, I was obviously very interested in the whole sociality of pain. So after the performance of the self-flagellation and walking in a hot coal, women would treat themselves, treat their wounds, and obviously the wounds would usually lead to markers as well. So it will be it would, the scar would stay there for years to come. So again, that is a sense of pride, that is a symbol again for their religiosity, if you want to call it. So that is definitely yeah, so that is definitely something that they would use. Yes, and Hatun, you were asking about male reception and the reaction of male within. So you have different levels here. So you have male men within the communities, so Shi'i communities, whether Shirazis or not. So some were supportive, some weren't, and even Shirazi men, some of them weren't, and they were saying, well, this is a male practice, what are you women doing? And that was something really difficult for them to accept as well for years. And also other women found it difficult for them to accept as well that other women were doing it. And a lot of them were saying that we never did it, why should we do it now? And some particularly, and there is a question about Bahrain here, and some particularly in Bahrain refused it totally and said, we do not need another reason for sectarian division here, particularly because in a lot of families in the Gulf, there are inter-religious marriages as well, or inter-sectarian marriages. And some would regard, although, and this is really interesting because in Bahrain, people would go specifically to Bahrain in order to observe self-flagellation among men. Bahrain is really known for on-the-street flagellations, but only among men. And that was so interesting that some women would totally accept flagellation among men, but refuse it among women. So the sectarian division was used when women are involved, but no mention of sectarian division when men were involved. And that difference I found really, really interesting that, you know, why when women perform it, it would be seen as fitna, whereas when men perform it, it is all right. So, and a lot of Shia women would and Shirazi particularly, who are very much into the self-flagellation, they would use it like, why when women participate in self-flagellation, it is regarded as something unacceptable, but when men do it, it's fine. So yeah, you do you had different reactions within the community in terms of maraja or sources of emulation. It is really, really interesting here how very, you know, big maraja are reluctant to comment on self-flagellation, or are very vague in their opinion about self-flagellation. Whereas Iran, for example, prohibits self-flagellation totally, and they are against it. And so you do have maraja that are very clear in their rejection, and a lot more that are very vague and not very clear on their opinion.
Great, Yafa. We have some questions. Some people were raising their hands and then they put their questions in writing. If you like to say your question, I think there was a hand raised. Angeline was raising her hand. Do you like to ask your question, or shall we read it?
I can read it as well. I just wanted to ask, do you think social media technology has played, you know, more of a significant role in the exportation of these rituals to the Middle East, as opposed to like these rituals gaining popularity in the 90s, for example? Because the way you explained was like, you know, later on in the 2000s. And with the future trajectory of these rituals too, do you think more women will be participating and forming stronger emotional attachments to them?
Yeah, thank you very much. And yes to both. So yes, I think you know, social media and technology played a huge role in the expansion of that ritual, and also you know, Shirazis themselves being very active in the internet played a huge role. And in terms of trajectory, you can see it, like when in 2007 that practice was performed for the first time in London, only very few, like I think 8 or so women participated, and when I was there in 2014, hundreds of women were there. And yeah, and when I then in 2015 went to the Gulf and observed the ritual there, also hundreds more and more women are participating. And it is really interesting to see how they are seeing it as a form of empowerment, of agency for them to be able to participate in a ritual that they have been excluded from for centuries.
There are many more questions. We have to read them very quickly. Alejandra is saying, how is this received by mainstream Shia? And if women from other Shia groups also have joined the rituals? Excuse me, I'll ask all questions and then maybe you could group some of them. Jalal Nasser is saying, is there a written fatwa by Shirazi leader Sayyid Sadr al-Shirazi or Sayyid Muhammad Taqi al-Mudarrisi? And then Tayyiba is saying, can you elaborate a little about how the reclaiming of these practices is a resistance to sectarian supremacy and political authoritarianism? Maybe this is enough for now, and see how we proceed.
Yes, so in terms of religious authorities, as I said, the opinions are not clear-cut. So they are very vague. So if you, and this is again something that I have not written about, but you can read Oliver Schabrot's 2 articles. He already written 2 articles on that, where he specifically went through these different fatwas and looked at the text. And he also, as you know, people were asking about Shirazis and Mudarrisis. Again, go to Oliver Schabrot. I can write his name down if you like. in the chat box. He wrote extensively, like 2 and the only 2 articles that actually exist on the fatwas of around self-flagellation. His latest article was just published in the journal of in the British Journal of in the Zahia.
British Journal of Middle Eastern Studies?
Yes, exactly. And so it was just published a month ago or so. So go and read that article, because he really goes into that. So, and our research actually complements each other, because he's a historian of religion. He looks at the historical sources, and he's a textual person as well, looking into, you know, textual, the fatwas that exist. And I look at how these fatwas are lived and experienced among women particularly. So how women reinterpret and go to these fatwas and use them in their daily life, so to speak. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Maybe we could ask Shifa to ask her question. Is Shifa still here? Yes, you are. Go ahead, Shifa.
Give me a minute, please.
Okay.
While you prepare your question, maybe
I was running away from the noise.
Elena has a question too.
Yes. Yes, can you hear me?
We can.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much for this lecture, first of all. Well, since you mentioned, Yafa, that most male authorities are against these practices, I wonder, is there any effort among these Shia women to develop in a way that some religious authority within their group? I'm thinking, for instance, of Amina Wadud in the States and in Sunni Islam. What about the Shirazis, beyond these practices of self-flagellation and to remember the Karbala, the Battle of Karbala, and so on? What about religious authority and religious jurisprudence, fiqh? What about their role? Thank you. If you have any information about it, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I just would like to make something very clear here, that religious authorities are not against the practice, and they are not for the practice either. They are very vague in their opinion about the practice of self-flagellation. This is really, really important to know, because it is a very long tradition among men to participate in self-flagellation. And this is why it is very problematic for the Maraja or the religious authorities to actually have a clear stand against or for the practice. So it is really important to just highlight that. In terms of
sorry, if how can they perform these practices if they are not in a way supported at least by a religious authority? Because within Shia Islam, religious authorities are extremely important, even much more, I would say, than within Sunni Islam. So how can they do that if authorities are so vague?
Yeah, with the support of the Shirazi Maraja themselves.
So the Shirazi Maraja, okay, they have some support within the Shirazi Maraja.
Yes, and what happened was that in 2007, the wife of Mujtaba Shirazi, she was in London, and she actually, suggested that women should be part of it, and that was the first step.
I see. It's very clear. Thank you very much. Thank you.
We will take thank you very much, Yafa. Thank you very much, Elena. We take a final question.
Can I ask my question, please?
Yeah, Shifa, yes.
Sorry to cut you off.
Go ahead. That's the final question, I think.
Okay, lucky me. Well, what brought my question is the idea that self-flagellation is not accepted among women, but it's accepted among men. So is it possible that it's an art representation of a religious ritual more than just a religious ritual? The same with anashid, which are music without, which is singing without music. Like men are allowed to do it, they're allowed to sing their anashid, but women aren't in most cases. So is it the same thing? And yeah, that's my question. Thank you. Thank you for the lecture.
Thank you, Shifa. Your name is actually really beautiful.
Thank you.
Shifa, I just would like to ask, you know, what do you understand under art?
It's a self-expression.
Performance.
It's a performance, or to self-express and to try to reach to others, I think.
Okay, brilliant. Yes, and this is why I've been using aesthetics. So I regard these ritual practices as a form of, performing the political through aesthetic expressions. And these aesthetic expressions, they are articulated through, as you said, poetry or anashid in a different context, but Shia commemoration poetry, but also through self-flagellation and walking in hot coal. These are all aesthetic expressions of the political on the female body. So the body is used as a tool to express dissensus, if you want to call it. So it is, and here I look at Rancière and Birgit Meyer, and the whole understanding of the of aesthetic as an not as a Kantian, so not as beauty and art, but as an Aristotelian understanding of aesthetics and the expression of what, as you said, one's identity, and that is expressed within a sociality, within a community, in order to highlight the similarities and the fight for the same cause, so to speak, through aesthetics. So I actually I continue, and that is maybe, Elena, also what you have been asking about, is that I actually continue where others have stopped. Like, for example, Talal Assad, and also and also others who looked at, like Mahmoud, for example, who looked at gendered performances through, for example, Mahmoud looked at fasting and praying and all this, but she has not included aesthetics. And what I wanted to do is to include the aestheticization of the of politics through the female body as a form of agentic expressions, similar to other agentic expressions that have been neglected within Islamic or Muslim communities of practices, in order to also highlight the performativity part in terms of self-flagellation and walking on hot coal. So not also I'm so to speak adding few other expressions that were not included so far in scholarship on female agency and empowerment, through including practices that are not necessarily recognized as agentic practices.
Excellent. This is so stimulating, so interesting. We may go on until tomorrow morning, but we have to stop, unfortunately. So thank you so much, Yafa. Thank you so much for all of you who came to this lecture and been patient with us. Maybe my colleague Hatun will introduce next week's lecture, or shall I do it?
I will leave it to you, but I wanted, because I promised one of the of the audience on the chat who asked a question, and we didn't mention her. May Sartawi, if you could say your comment, and then we will conclude. Zahia, you can then take over from there.
Yes, sure.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much, Yafa and Khatoon and Zahia, I think. I don't have a question. I live in Kuwait, and I've been to many majalis, and there is the practice of self-flagellation, but there hasn't been, the walking on coal. But here there are women who sing anashid, and it's much more powerful when it's just women. Sometimes it's just a screen, and then you follow what the men are doing, and they have the leather belts, and they have the chains. However, on our side, it's just our hands. But when it's just the women themselves performing, when it's just the women singing the anashid, they really sing and they repeat the stories of when Zainab hit her head, and then they start hitting their heads and their faces, and it's much more powerful when it's just the woman leading the woman and guiding the woman. Although there's much more to learn from you. Unfortunately, I came late, so I wasn't able to hear most of the lecture. Will it be uploaded on YouTube?
It will.
Inshallah.
Okay. Yes, the lecture is being recorded. We're going to upload it after, obviously, a few days.
Zahia, before we go, can I just have one last thing? I would like to thank the organizers, but also the participants for all your questions. I'm looking also for those who we didn't have the chance to comment on. Obviously, this was really just a nutshell of what I've wrote about in my book. So, and those who are interested in particular countries can also see a lot of examples in there as well. So, please have a chance. If you have the chance, please go and read these chapters that interest you. It's divided into the particular practices as well. And I would like to thank you so much for your questions. If you have any, because there was a comment in the chat box, if you have any particular question that I wasn't able to answer, please do email me, and I'm happy to respond. And if there is time, we can always have a Zoom conversation together as well. And I hope that one day we can also all meet in person as well.
I hope so.
Thank you very much, Zahia and Khatoon.
That's a possibility. We will see. So I'm sorry I have to bring it to an end, but before we go, I would announce the next lecture and the final lecture, which will be on the 24th of this month. It will be given by Qaisra Shahraz. She's based in Manchester, and she works on Muslim Women's Art Foundation. And she's going to speak about celebrating and exploring the lives of women, especially in the diaspora, Muslim women, of course, especially in the diaspora. So I look forward to that. Qaisra is an author, she's a novelist, and she runs the Manchester Festival, Cultural Festival annually. So I personally look forward to that. So thank you very much indeed. Thank you for bearing with us, and thank you for your contributions. And obviously, thank you, Yafa, for being central to all of this. Thanks, and good night.
Good night, everyone.
Assalamu.
Bye-bye.
Bye.